Good afternoon. Welcome to the May 10th meeting of the Brentwood Rotary Club. For those of you visiting today, my name is Michael King, and I am the president of this club. Before we start, I have a prayer for every single person in this club, or in this room today. And that prayer is, I hope each and every one of you experiences the level of joy that I have each and every Friday between now and the end of June. Today's invocation will be given by Robert Fiddler, followed by Tom Carr with the pledge and the four-way test. Robert.
Bear with me, please. Our most gracious, loving, and forgiving Heavenly Father, we are forever grateful for the many blessings you continue to bestow upon us. Make us remember that we live by the Rotary motto of service above self, and that with those blessings we should share with those that are less fortunate in the way. Please be with all those that are sick or recovering, especially John Stokes, Brian Shaw, and Julie Boone Porter, excuse me. Can't read my own writing. I can't remember Porter. Be with them as they recover, and their support crew that takes care of them. Please be with all our armed forces around the world and their families back home as they wait their safe return. And please be with our public service people, fire, police, and EMTs that protect us in our own community on a daily basis. We are forever grateful for your love for us and encourage us to be more like you in dealing with our fellow man. Let's just soothe and nurse our bodies in this high service. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Please face each other and say the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now the four-way test of what all Rotarians think, say, and do. First,
Is it the truth?
Second,
Is it fair all concerned? Will it build goodwill, better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? All right. Secretary Keeley Hall is going to introduce our guest and visiting Rotarians.
And now, Brentwood Rotarians, please join me in welcoming our three distinguished guests today. First up on our docket, welcome Chuck Blackburn's guest. There are few people left in the world who will admit that they are friends with Chuck Blackburn, but Aaron is one of them.
This is a good friend and a prospective client. And also, his name is Aaron Kirchner, and he does a lot of things. One thing he did is today he bought a sponsorship of a hole in our golf tournament. I can't hear you. Sponsorship. Thank you. And he has three outstanding and very large athletic centers. One in Franklin, one in Nashville, and one in Murfreesboro. And they are called the Franklin Athletic Club, the Nashville Athletic Club, the Murfreesboro Athletic Club. Aaron Kirchner. Welcome,
Welcome, Aaron. And now number two on our list. George Johnson has a guest from the Red Cross, and that's a real plus.
I'd like to introduce Andrea Ronda. Andrea is our rep for the Red Cross the last couple of years, and worked with the drive, and is here to present a couple of awards for the show.
All right, and working our way to the final name on the list, I'm going to try something. It's going to be an experiment. I don't know how it's going to turn out. Bear with me here. Hey, Jennifer. All right, so sitting next to my good friend Jennifer Bourne, we have another good friend, Jennifer, who's sitting next to another good friend, Jennifer.
Oh my God.
Jennifer. Middle Jennifer. Would you like to introduce Jennifer on the right?
Yes, hello, thank you. This is my friend Jennifer Henry. We work together at First Farmers Bank in Brentwood, and she's the branch manager, and we have worked together earlier in our careers, so I'm really excited that we're working together again.
Doctor. All right, back to you, Dr. King.
Thank you, Keeley Hall. Nice Spies Like Us reference, very good. Okay, next week is the district conference luncheon. That means we will not be meeting here next week. If you want to go to the district conference luncheon, you have until 2 o'clock this afternoon to sign up. They need a head count by this afternoon. So you go back home before 2 o'clock if you haven't signed up and you want to go, and either look at the bulletin or the email that was sent to you and register. The club will pay for your lunch, but you must register. Don't be coming to me next Wednesday or Thursday with an email that says, hey, I want to go. You got until 2 o'clock to sign up. All right. Now, the week after that, May 24th, there is no meeting in honor of Memorial Day. So for the next 2 weeks, we will not be here. So one is the district conference. One is do whatever it is you want to do. All right. Larry Kane has some stuff to say.
Okay. Last week we went over the numbers. Not going to do that again. Kind of brought you up to date. We had an okay week. We got 4 new sponsors this week, which was not bad. Still need you to keep working. If you don't have a sponsor, get one. If you've got one, get 2. If you've got 2, get 3 or 4, et cetera, et cetera. You're sitting with your teams today. I hope that worked out. You got to eat with some new people. I know that's kind of different. And hopefully you had some discussions maybe about the success your team was having and how you were going about doing that. I appreciate y'all doing that. Next year, this will be much more organized. We may have a whole meeting built around this kind of format. That's what a couple of the other clubs do that have golf tournaments. So we have never done that before, and we tried it this year just to see what would happen. But next year we'll be a little more organized. So let's take a quick look, since the teams are all sitting together, at where we are with our teams. Ta-da! You can see Devin McClendon's team right on top, 87 points. Keep in mind, 1 point equals $100. Remember that. So Devin McClendon's team. Devin, stand up. Oh, Devin's not here. So Devin McClendon's team's 87 points. They got a 50% participation, which is, I'll explain that in just a minute. And then you can see on down the list there of the other teams and where you stand and your participation rate. And obviously, if you notice that the higher participation rate, the higher the numbers. So the teams have all done pretty well, and there's a lot of room and a lot of areas that we can improve in. So this may not be the only set of teams, though. There could be one more team, I think, in this room that we call the A team. And y'all probably remember the A team up there. There you go. That would be your superstar A team. And let's just see where. Now remember, Devin had 87 points with 10 people, right? Okay, let's see what the A team's done. They got 84 points between and 100% participation. Both of them have sold. The good news is one of them is just starting. And he just happens to be the guy that won it last year with the most sales. He is just starting. So that 84 will significantly increase, and they're doing just what they said they were going to do as a twosome. Let's take a quick look at the individual points so you can see what individuals. Remember, Devin's team had 87 points. You can see Devin sits right on top with 42.5 points. He did a great job selling sponsorship so far. He sold 5 sponsors. And then right on down the list, there's 13 members that had 1,000 or had $10,000. They're not up there. So we've done pretty well. And if you're on that list, congratulations and thank you for what you've done. I hope you'll do more. But that's where we are, and you can kind of see if you hadn't sold anything, you can kind of see how easy it was or how these people went about doing it. The total of all the points for the team right now is about $70,000, which is about 20,000 short of our goal. We've got 6 weeks we got 45 days from today to be exact, but 6 weeks to finish this out. We got 40 outstanding hold sponsors from last year. That's $10,000. We've got 30 members who haven't sold anything. That's $6,000. So we got $16,000 if just a few things happen, not counting all the new things I know everybody's going to do. Oh yeah, there is one more individual that we should put up there in addition to these 12 we've got. Let's show one more individual. $5,150. Curry Andrews, 21 sponsors, and he gave me 2 more this morning. So if you need some inspiration, call him. He'll be glad to tell you how to do it. And obviously he knows how to do it, and he's had great success, and we appreciate that. Just ask. Curry said, just ask. I have a lot of people that say to me, I hate to ask people for money. I hate to ask people for money. Well, remember, you're not asking them for money for you. You're asking them for money for a 46-year-old Brentwood organization who is raising money to give away. BRCCF this year so far has given away we've given away $50,500. In about 2 months, I'm going to stand up here and hopefully give away another $40,000 to $50,000 to our charities that we're sponsoring with the golf tournament this year. So that's where the money's going. When you ask somebody for money, it's not for you. You're taking it personally if you think that. This is for the club and for where that money goes, and we need that. We can do it. We can do it, guys. See you in 3 weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry Kane. Okay, so one of our guests today is going to make a special presentation. Andrea, would you please come up?
Thank you. For having me here today, and it's so nice to see some of the familiar faces that I met out at the blood drive when I came out there. I had never been to your pancake breakfast before, and that thing was absolutely amazing. I walked up and I'm like, holy cow, they really have it going on here. So thank you. It was my first time working with you guys on this, and I really appreciate all that you did to help with the Red Cross. I know you help a lot of different people. You help a lot of different organizations. I cannot begin to express to you how appreciative we are that you're one of our premier partners. Every unit that you collect, you help up to 3 different patients. So with the amount, we're at around 1,400, 1,500, I don't have the exact number today, of what you have collected. That is impacting thousands of people in our community, and that's huge. And I'm sure all of you in here know someone who's been a blood recipient, or maybe you have been a blood recipient, so you know how important it is. We can't just go fabricate it from somewhere. We need it human to human, touch to be able to help transform lives. And every number is so important because every number actually has a story to that, and that story is attached to a person. So it's something that you're really impacting. I'm out in the community and I'm meeting people every day who telling me the stories of how their loved ones were saved, or how even when they went through their illness, they were actually able to have energy and being able to have conversations with their loved ones up until the end. But because they were receiving those blood products, it mattered that much. Guys, there's so many meetings I have with people where I'm just in tears because I know you can feel what they've gone through. You know how hard it is. So it's people like you who make a difference in advertising this and donating yourself and being able to go out of your way to donate an hour to make a difference. So thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I would like to present to you some awards. George, if you would like to come up here. Y'all are premier partners with us, and I have 2 certificates for the last 2 years, as well as a pin to give to you. Thank you so much for all of your hard work and being a premier partner with us. And this is showing in 2017, 58 units that you collected. And in 2018, 61 units that you have collected. So as we continue every year, we can just continue to help these numbers go up and up and up to impact more and more lives. And as I'm working more with you, I really want to do everything I can to make a difference, to help let everybody know what you guys are doing to help the Red Cross and being our partners. So thank you so much. Appreciate all that you do, and it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you on behalf of the club, and need to remember Jim Villers, who started this 27 years ago in honor of his son, John Ryan. Robert Fiddler sitting right beside him, he was the first chair, and then Charles Grumman has been my co-chair for the last 4 or 5 years. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Quickly, I have a handful of these Paul Harris Fellow Awards that I have to give out. First one, a Paul Harris Fellow +2, Bob Searcy. All righty. Also a Paul Harris Fellow +2, Warren Bryant. All right. Paul Harris Level +4, Leon Partain. All right. Paul Harris Level +7, Bill Coles. And the last one, Paul Harris Level +5, Harris Ham. Thank you. Hang on here for a second. Harrison, do you know what you and Bono have in common?
A lot of money.
Okay. You know what else you have in common? You both share the same birthday, which is today. Now, I know people have said that I often have told me I sing like Bono. And so what I do is lead this group in a rousing rendition of Happy Birthday. All right, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Harrison. Happy birthday to you.
Man, I am not going to miss singing Happy Birthday in the microphone. All right. We are going to have a new induction of a new member today, Taylor Morrison. Jack, Taylor, would you come up here, please? And while they're making their way, for those who want the BRCCF, there is a meeting today right after this club meeting, so don't run away. Please be here. Thank you.
Well, it is my pleasure to introduce Taylor Morrison today. Taylor is, you don't see many of him walking around. He's a native Nashville. How about that? In the Creve Hall, where he still lives with his wife, Jenny, and 4 dogs. Their names are Peyton, Eli, Goose, and Scooby. So they broke the theme somewhere along the way. He attends Grace Community Church. He's a financial advisor with the LPL Financial in Maryland Farms. He loves the outdoors. He plays a lot of sports and hikes and all of that stuff. He loves the Vols, where he went to school, the Atlanta Braves, Nashville Predators, and the Tennessee Titans.
What's his blood type?
It's coming. Give me a minute.
It's on there.
Here, please help me welcome Taylor to the club.
All right, the last thing before we get to our speaker, you're going to get to listen to me read in public. We got a letter from the District 6880 Foundation. If you'll recall, we gave money when the hurricanes came through Lee County, Alabama. This club had donated money, the BRCCF did, and they sent us a letter saying, please accept my heartfelt thanks to your club and your members for making a contribution to the District 6880 Foundation designated for disaster relief in Lee County due to the tornado on March 3rd of this year. This catastrophic event resulted in the loss of 23 lives, along with hundreds of homes destroyed or damaged, with a like number of individuals and family displaced. Your contribution of $5,000 will make a difference. See how he did there? Well, that was last year, wasn't it? We'll be the inspiration. To the victims of the tragedy, and will also help rebuild the devastated area. Please know that 100% of your donations will go to this cause. You are the inspiration. In conclusion, on behalf of all the members in District 6880, I again wish to express my deep appreciation for your generous gift and the outpouring of compassion you have shown to our district. Please keep all those affected victims in your thoughts and prayers. P.S. A big thank you. You are an inspiration. So that's from District 6880. All right, now I'm done. And we're going to listen to our speaker make the Fed really interesting. Charles? Sybil? Somebody introduce them.
Fighting over that. I think I can do this without my glasses. Okay. Dr. Daniel J. Smith is the director of the Political Economy Research Institute and associate professor of economics in the Jones College of Business at Middle Tennessee State University. Dr. Smith was previously the Associate Director of the Manuel H. Johnson Center for Political Economy and the BB&T Professor of Economic Freedom at Troy University. Dr. Smith also serves as the book review editor for the Review of Austrian Economics. Daniel was raised in Midland, Michigan, where he also did his undergraduate in economics, banking and finance, and business management at Northwood University. Daniel also received his PhD in economics from George Mason University. Dr. Smith's academic research and policy work uses Austrian and public choice economics to analyze private and public governance institutions. I think he's very modest. I received this morning. I heard Dr. Smith speak recently, and he's very accomplished, very published. He has some really interesting articles out there. But I was just, I wanted Dr. Smith to come because his presentation to me was so relevant to discussions today of socialism in America. And it just reminded me of the famous Margaret Thatcher quote, "The problem with socialism is that eventually you run out of other people's money." So with that, would you kindly join me in welcoming Dr. Daniel Smith.
All right, thank you very much. I'm honored to be here. I've given a lot of public lectures, radio interviews, TV interviews, and never, not once, has anyone ever taken up on my offer to talk in my primary research area, which is monetary policy and institutions. So I don't know what you did to anger Charles, but you are apparently being punished for something. I worked really hard to hopefully make this an entertaining lecture, and I apologize if you put you to sleep. At the very least, you should be able to walk away with some really cool abbreviations you can drop at dinner parties to impress your guest. Real quick, I just want to mention the Political Economy Research Institute at Middle Tennessee State University is a brand new institute. We're started with initial seed money from the Charles Koch Foundation. We provide fellowships. We provide, we do reading groups. We recently had a reading group discussion colloquium where students came in, they read Karl Marx, they read Adam Smith, they read F.A. Hayek, they read G.A. Cohen, so a wide range of different works, and they just had
unplanned conversation. They just debated those really important texts in political economy. We also do public lectures. We just brought in Dr. Art Lapper for a full day. He gave a great public lecture on international trade. We provide PhD fellowships. So these are preparing students to go be teachers in the classroom, do research. We provide undergraduate research fellowships as well. And then we're also starting to do some policy research. Now this is bringing academic research to bear on state and local issues here in Tennessee, talking like 20, 30-page, really in-depth studies on key issues that we see on the horizon here in Tennessee, and trying to contribute to those discussions in a positive way. So even if people, you may disagree with some of the research we come out with, but I think you'll at least respect the level of quality and the academic integrity that goes into that research. You are all welcome to attend any of our public events, but just to give you kind of a preview, we have Dr. Pete Bedke from George Mason University. On October 2nd, he's going to be giving a talk on the continued relevancy of F.A. Hayek. And then that evening, he's going to give a talk on James M. Buchanan. James M. Buchanan was the Nobel laureate that went to Middle Tennessee as an undergrad, went on to win to George Mason University. I interacted with him a little bit at the tail end of my training at George Mason University, and he's kind of the inspiration behind the Institute. His research basically applies economics to government decision-making, trying to understand how policymakers make decisions and why sometimes they make really poor decisions. Dr. Ben Powell from Texas Tech University will be giving a talk on the myths and realities of socialism. It'll be on his book that's a little bit more boldly named Socialism Sucks. I wanted a more inviting title, but it's about his memoirs of he traveled around the world, went to as many unfree countries as he could sneak his way into, and didn't just go to the major cities or where they take the elites. He actually went to the local bars and he says that he drank his way through the unfree world, and he's just kind of detailing all the problems that socialism faces when implemented. This talk will not be about my forthcoming book or book under contract currently being written. I'll talk a little bit about the tail end of it, but mainly I'm going to be talking about how the Federal Reserve operates and some of the current debates going on in terms of how to conduct monetary policy, especially when we hit the next recession. It's not a question of will we, but eventually we will hit another recession. What are the arrows in the quiver of the Federal Reserve to address any type of recession? So the Fed has a dual mandate. That's to maximize employment and maintain monetary stability, and they have a couple tools in order to do this. I've classified the first set of tools as old school monetary policy. So if you've had an economics course, even probably at the high school level, you were exposed to these open market operations and the discount rate. But there's some tools that were kind of discovered during the financial crisis. These include interest on reserves and unconventional monetary policy measures such as asset purchases and monetary extensions. There's also some new tools and strategies. Here's your first abbreviation that you can drop. It's zero lower bound, ZLB. And what basically all that means is that you can't get interest rates below zero. I'll talk. Actually, that's technically not true, so I'll address that later on. But the argument is you can't get it. The Fed can't target interest rates below zero, so therefore that's the lower bound. What do you do if you're in recession, interest rates are close to zero? How does the Federal Reserve stimulate the economy? So they came up with some new monetary policy measures. And most excitingly, a bunch of new tools. Essentially, economists are really stressed out right now, monetary economists, and that there were people that study business cycles say we're overdue for another recession, and we are not prepared. We still don't know what went wrong we can't agree with what went wrong on the last financial crisis, and we're in the situation with low interest rates. How will we respond when the next recession hits? Some of the current things being debated are yield curve management, negative interest rates, helicopter drops, and dual interest rate targeting. So I will briefly explain all of those and hopefully keep you awake throughout the process. So federal open market operations, this is what you are all familiar with this probably a little bit. This is the buying and selling of Treasury securities, bills, bonds, and notes by the Federal Reserve. When you purchase Treasury securities, the Federal Reserve gives an order to the U.S. Bureau. They print the money. They use that new money to purchase these Treasuries on the secondary market. They don't purchase them directly from the Treasury, and this injects liquidity into the market. So this is an easy monetary policy. It's going to kind of spike the punch bowl and encourage more economic activity by lowering the rate. When you sell Treasury securities, what you're doing is you're taking liquidity out of the market, and so that's just going to be a tightening monetary policy. You're going to see interest rates go up, and it's going to be a decrease in investment activity. So I have to show a couple graphs. I'm a monetary economist. So this is the kind of the conventional consensus in economics. It's called the neoclassical Keynesian perspective. It's pretty much the same theory. And basically, you say there's a shock to aggregate demand. So let's say there's like a trade war or something like that. You have a decline in aggregate demand. So what the Federal Reserve does is it engages in quantitative easing or easy monetary policy. And this gets us a little bit of inflation, but also some economic growth. And the theory of this, we talk in technical terms, but really the theory is that we trick people into thinking the economy is doing better than it is. Because people see that they have more money, so they're more comfortable making purchases. Businesses are more willing to invest in expansions of their business. But eventually, they realize that it is just more money in the system. It wasn't actually an increase in aggregate demand, so they're somewhat tricked. So eventually, people realize that, hey, this is inflation, but we end up on the original aggregate demand curve, just with higher inflation in the long run. So that's the conventional theory. Now, there's a new theory out there called modern monetary theory. The proponent of it is U.S. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. And it claims that essentially we have unlimited physical capacity and that we can issue as much debt as we want, and the Federal Reserve can monetize that debt to its content, whatever amount you want to spend, and we don't have to worry about inflation and we will get a decline in economic growth. Obviously, that's out of contention with what I just showed you, which is the consensus in economics that you will get inflation. So it does not pass the test of technical economics. In fact, a poll of economists, and keep in mind the average economist self-identifies as a moderate liberal. Not a single economist in the survey done by the University of Chicago Booth School of Business agreed with the basic tenets of modern monetary theory. In fact, even Paul Krugman has come out and said that it seems like sophistry and obviously untrue. And this is the same Paul Krugman who, under President Obama, he advanced a serious proposition that President Obama should give an order to print $1 trillion coin in order to evade the debt ceiling. So if the economist who makes that proposition seriously looks like sophistry, then I think that's the final nail in the coffin for that theory. And I also think there's problems with robust political economy in terms of knowledge and incentive problems. Even if, let's say, it is true, well, there's no constraint. Therefore, you're like essentially giving politicians a unlimited piggy bank and permission to spend as much as they want. So there's nothing economically, if that were, even if the theory were true, that would stop them from over spending. And let's be quite frank, even allegedly conservative politicians in D.C. have not shown a lot of physical constraint. So kind of opening up this Pandora's box, or whichever reference you want, if you want to call it siren's call or whatever, it would be irresistible to politicians to open up that piggy bank. There is an alternative theory, and in full disclosure, I am on the executive council for the Society for the Development of Austrian Economics. So that will give away my bias here. But basically, Austrian economists think of the interest rate just like any other price in the economy, that it conveys information and provides an incentive. So if the price of if the tin mine collapses in Argentina, we don't have to even know what happened, but the price of tin goes up, and consumers and people that use tin and what they manufacture are going to see the price go up, and they're going to adjust their behavior correspondingly. People that find it cheap to substitute to another product will use something else, use another metal to manufacture their product. and the economy just automatically has the information incentives to respond to that information. Think of how long under a central planner you would have to identify everyone that uses tin, and then have a big discussion politically about what are the appropriate uses, and there'd be special interest groups donating to make sure that they got came out on top of this political decision. It would take months upon months, but with the price system, it does it automatically. So when it comes to interest rates, the interest rate is the outcome. It's the price of the market for the supply and demand for loanable funds. And when the Federal Reserve artificially keeps interest rates low, that's the red line right there. Well, on the demand side, the people demanding loanable funds, so investors, are going to see a low interest rate. So they're going to engage in longer term investments. They're going to say this is a good time to expand, to make another factory, hire more workers. And so they're going to draw resources into producing longer term goods, making those big investments. But on the supply side, with the interest rates lower, so people supplying loanable funds are going to see a lower interest rate. And what do? Well, they're going to save less, because why save so much if the interest rate is lower? So they are actually going to have the incentive to consume more. So this is going to drag resources into more short-term production, saying, no, we shouldn't make long-term investments. People want to consume more of these resources today. So you got labor and capital being pulled into two different directions, and our underlying what we can actually do is exhibited by that black line, that black triangle. We don't have the resources to both have all the consumption that we're undergoing right now and to finish all those long-term investments that we're doing. We simply cannot. So that's going to create an economic collapse. You have to realign those resources with underlying preferences. So under this theory, it's actually the Federal Reserve that under certain conditions can actually spike the punch bowl and cause the actual recession. And there is evidence, this is from John Taylor at Stanford University, there is evidence that the Federal Reserve did this prior to the financial crisis of 2007, that they kept interest rates artificially low according to the popular Taylor rule, which is the rule they had followed for essentially the past 20 years. It's the accepted rule that you're supposed to follow in monetary policy. They dropped interest rates below that, and that fits with the evidence that they kind of spiked the punch bowl, and that led to the overall recession. Now, so that's open market operations. Also, when they're doing open market operations, they use their target rate is the effective federal funds rate. This is the overnight lending rate among other major banks. So other banks look at each other and say, at the end of the day, they have to meet their reserve requirement. So they're mandated to have enough reserves on hand at the end of the day. Some of them, they had more withdrawals than they expected, so they don't have enough reserves on hand. Other banks have excess reserves. And obviously, you're losing money if you have excess reserves. So that bank wants to lend it out, the other bank wants to borrow it. So they balance it out at the end of the day, and that creates the effective federal funds rate. That's the most convenient metric that the Fed has traditionally used as its target rate. The other rate that they have used is the discount rate, and this is also called the penalty rate. So if a bank cannot get another bank to actually lend to them, so other banks are saying, ooh, I looked at your books, you don't look solvent. I'm a little bit concerned about your operations. Maybe you have too many mortgage-backed securities on your hand. They are going to say, I'm not going to lend to you. So the Federal Reserve will step in as a lender of last resort, but they give this discount rate as a penalty, say you're going to be penalized for not having enough reserves on hand. And by increasing that rate, that penalty rate, that's going to be a tighter monetary policy, because it's going to encourage banks to make sure that they have enough reserves on hand, so they're going to be a little bit more careful. And if they decrease that rate, the penalty is lower, so it's going to be a loose monetary policy. Now, old school monetary policy using both the discount rate and open market operations was what's referred to as a corridor system, where at the top rate was the discount rate, and at the bottom was zero interest rates, because you couldn't go below that. And monetary policy was always in between those. And they could shrink this corridor, expand this corridor, depending on what they wanted to do. But this is how monetary policy was, how they tried to achieve that target rate in between, by moving their balance sheets back and forth to adjust that rate. Now, with the introduction of a new tool, interest on reserves, that has been slightly changed. This was a new tool established in 2008. And what the Federal Reserve does is they pay interest on reserves, but also interest on excess reserves. And the excess reserve interest rate is the one that has the most influence that I'm going to talk about here. If you have a high interest rate on excess reserves, you have more reserves. Banks have more reserves at the Federal Reserve because they're paying them to do so. So that's going to be a tight monetary policy. And if you have low interest rates on excess reserves, that's going to be a loose monetary policy. So what this did is this moved from the zero lower bound, that bottom one. The bottom floor is now going to be the interest rate on excess reserves. So it shrunk the corridor a little bit, but they could expand the corridor at the top. So it didn't really change much of anything. But the Federal Reserve in the financial crisis expanded their balance sheet so much that they moved beyond this corridor, and now they're at the floor where the target rate has become interest on excess reserves. Now, this is kind of technical, so I'm not going to linger too long on that. But let me tell you about what it actually means. So the advantages of this is called a floor system. So we were at a corridor system where we're in between two rates, and now we're at a floor system where interest on excess reserves is the target rate. And what happens with this is, so one of the advantages is that it takes a lot of guesswork out of monetary policy. Where before doing open market operations, we're trying to get this target rate, it wasn't perfect. Now they literally just set the interest on excess reserve rate, and that is what that rate's going to be. So it makes life a lot easier for monetary economists. The second thing is that the floor system actually separates the decision between the balance sheet decisions, how much reserves banks should have, and then monetary, what the interest rate should be overall. So it gives them another lever to use whenever they need to stimulate the economy. Arguably, this could make the central banking system more secure because now banks have a lot of reserves. So technically, if a recession hit, they'd be a little bit better situated to withstand that, at least in theory. And finally, at the zero lower bound, zero interest rates, you turn into a floor system anyways, so you might as well already just flip over to that system. And also, traditional quantitative easing becomes ineffective at the zero lower bound. That's actually, there's wide agreement that QE2 and QE3, the quantitative easing after the financial crisis, were largely ineffective and money ill spent. Because we were at the zero lower bound anyways. There's nothing the Federal Reserve could have done in terms of quantitative easing that would have sparked the economy. Now, the disadvantages of a floor system. So the floor system has a much larger footprint on the financial sector, so you're soaking up funds that would be lent out in the private sector. Instead, they're locked up in the Federal Reserve. Second is that interest rate and reserve decisions, well, you could separate them up in how you're making the decision. They're kind of like a steering wheel and gas pedal. They are two separate systems, but they have influences on each other. So separating that decision can lead to some unintended consequences. It also, untethering monetary policy from the reserves, the balance sheet of the Federal Reserve, once again, it gives essentially an unlimited piggy bank to politicians again. Because now they can spend as much money and have the Federal Reserve take on excess reserve, expand their balance sheet, and it won't affect interest rates. So there's no penalty for the government spending even more money that it does not have. And really concerningly, under the floor system, the effective federal funds rate, it becomes unmeaningful. So this is the interbank lending market, where banks look at each other's balance sheets and say, ooh, you don't look solvent, so I'm not going to lend to you. Well, with the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, consumers already have zero incentive to look at the balance sheets of banks. It used to be before FDIC, you as a consumer, before you deposited funds in a bank, you would actually say, hey, let me look at your books. What are your reserves? You do your due diligence. There'd be consumer rating agencies that would rate banks. Now, you park your funds in whatever bank gives you the highest interest rate, but the bank giving you the highest interest rate is also going to be the riskiest, right? So it makes us all risky. It systematically encourages us to be riskier overall. And now you're going to remove the last restraint that we have in the interbank lending market. Banks look at each other's books. So you take away that market, and no one's looking at the bank's books except for themselves. So that's going to systematically increase risk overall. So that's a really big concern. Number 5, the interest on excess reserves has less effect than the EFFR, so you have less ability to actually influence the economy. It does give the Federal Reserve a larger discretionary budget. If you've ever been in the Federal Reserve building, they have a very nice art collection. The branches have great workout facilities, daycare. You're paid to essentially be a researcher, but 0 classes you have to teach. It's a really nice gig. So it's great for the monetary economist, but may not be a good public policy. So that's the floor versus the corridor system. The Federal Reserve has recently announced that they are going to maintain the floor system, and a lot of countries have flirted with this, including Canada, and they have actually reverted back, saying the disadvantages is too costly. We're going to move back to a corridor system. The only other major country that uses the floor system right now is New Zealand. So I don't think it's a long enough debate, but there's a huge debate about whether we should stay on it or not. And I personally think that they made the wrong choice going with the floor, saying we're going to keep on the floor rather than go back to a corridor system. There were also some unconventional monetary policy tools that were discovered during the financial crisis, including direct lending to non-banks. Technically, this is illegal for the Federal Reserve to do. So as any bureaucratic agency would do, when they're told they can't do something, they find a way to do it. And how they did it is they created a private entity that they owned entirely called Maiden Lanes 1, 2, and 3. And Maiden Lanes is a street that the New York Fed is on, so this is why they called it that. And that company did the direct lending to the non-banks. So the Fed was like, we're not doing it. This company is, but we own that company. So that's how they got around it, but that's now, no one has challenged that, so that is now official tool of the Fed. Large-scale asset purchases, so these are like in the financial crisis, the securities guaranteed by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. That had not been done before by the Federal Reserve. And then maturity extension program. If you've heard of Operation Twist, that's what they're doing, is they're also not just looking at the short-term rates, but also looking at some long-term rates as well. I won't go, that's a little bit technical, and I really wanted to actually talk about these new tools, which is the most exciting. How am I doing on time, by the way? 6 minutes, all right. I'm actually doing good. So new tools and strategies for the ZLB, the zero lower bound. What are economists throwing at the wall to see what sticks right now? Yield curve management is one of the more popular ones, and that's where instead of just targeting one interest rate, they're going to target interest rates all along the yield curve. So they'll target a 1 month, 3 month, 1 year, 5 year, 10 year. So it'll really increase. Well, it'll be good for monetary economists because there'll be a lot more demand for us because it's a lot more complicated task. So you're going to simultaneously try to target all of these rates. Negative interest rates is also being discussed. Pablo Escobar, the famous drug cartel owner, he would bury his money in the ground, and some of it would be eaten by worms, and like it'd be getting moist and mildew and mold. So his accountants actually put a 10% depreciation on his cash in the ground. So accountants have dealt with negative interest rates before. So this isn't something out of the ordinary. I assume drug cartels do it as well with their accounting. They actually have very sophisticated accountants, but they expect some of that cash will be seized by the cops or something like that. So it's not that crazy. If the equilibrium interest rate, because there's a lot of demand for safe assets, is negative, then that is the market clearing rate, and the Federal Reserve should be pursuing that. Is this the argument for it? The question is it, number one, legal? Actually, we don't know. A lot of people are working on that. We've never dealt with this before. And second, is it economically feasible? I think it is, but there's not a consensus on that issue yet. Another one is helicopter drops. This is where we get really fun. So this is essentially taking what George W. Bush did, where he did quantitative easing, but combined with a tax cut. And it's going to say that, we're going to formalize it and do it through the Fed and just say the Federal Reserve is just going to drop money into household bank accounts electronically and use that to stimulate the economy. Lots of issues with that, including what it was referred to as Ricardian equivalence, is that people seeing the free money are going to say, well, taxes are going to have to go up, or inflation's going to have to go up to pay for this. So rather than spend that money, they're going to save it. So it won't have it won't stimulate the economy as expected. Then finally, dual interest rate targeting. This is where you say, well, instead of just targeting one rate, what we're going to do is we're going to target both borrowing and saving rates. So the borrowing rate, we're going to say that it's going to be really low, but the saving rate, we're going to put it a little bit higher. So they separate those two rates out, and that way stimulate the economy. The obvious problem with that one is you have arbitrage, right? Anyone would say, okay, well, I'll borrow at that rate and then save at that rate, and so that's going to go away. All of these ideas sound horrible, right? So economists are really scratching their heads at this point, and this is why I think my book is actually going to turn out to be well-timed, is we look at the knowledge and incentive problems faced by the Federal Reserve, and I'm going to go through this quickly. But basically, the Federal Reserve does not have all the knowledge required to obtain their dual mandate. It's really difficult. There's long and variable lags in terms of conducting monetary policy. Making economic predictions is next to impossible. Constantly changing things all the time. Regulatory policy is constantly changing. So whether you're for the Affordable Care Act or not, passing it during the recession, causing more regulation, or the Dodd-Frank Act, are both going to destimulate the economy, right? At the same time that the Fed's trying to stimulate the economy, you have regulatory policy that is imposing costs and thus causing the economy to go down. So whether you think it's good or bad, you have contradictory policy at different levels going on. It's really hard. Different policy changes could affect how monetary policy manifests itself in the economy. As soon as making these economic predictions, Alan Greenspan, I think Gabe mentioned this to me the other day, he famously used like men underwear as a leading economic predictor. But as soon as someone discovers that it's a leading economic predictor, well, now everyone adjusts their behavior and it's no longer useful. So it's very, very difficult to make economic predictions. There's also incentive problems. The Federal Reserve has largely monetized the debt and allowed the federal debt to grow to where it is now by keeping our interest rates artificially low. So that keeps the interest rate on the U.S. government debt pretty low and allows them to keep spending money in other capacities. There's been executive branch influence, legislative branch influence, where they actually, especially running up to election, the current president and the current legislators, they want the economy to look like it's doing well, even if it really isn't doing well. And both parties are guilty of this. They influence the Federal Reserve to cater policy to their political preferences, and that compromises monetary stability and the value of the dollar. And also, the Federal Reserve is a bureaucracy like any other bureaucracy. You have 800 monetary economists that work directly for the Federal Reserve. You got a couple hundred extra on that gets invited to plush conferences in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, a great fly fishing place if you've ever been there. And worse yet, we're academic bureaucrats. Is there a class of people less able to operate in the real world than, our heads are high in the cloud. We're really smart about one thing, but if you relax the assumptions in any way, we really can't operate in the real world. The people that work with me know this as a fact. But it also encourages groupthink. The economists at the Federal Reserve sit as editors of journals. They serve as referees for journal reports when they're trying to publish academic research. And this could dangerously cause us all to think in a similar fashion. You also have special interest groups. I'm going to skip that for now, but just think like Wall Street, Goldman Sachs the revolving door where someone works at Goldman Sachs as an executive, then goes to the Federal Reserve, and then they work at the Federal Reserve, and then they get a cushy $1 million a year contract afterwards. So there's a lot of bad incentives there to cater monetary policy to Wall Street. Our book outlines all these knowledge and incentive problems, and then we also explore 4 alternatives. One would be inflation or NGDP targeting. The second would be put the Federal Reserve into the Constitution to protect it from being pressured by politicians. Milton Friedman actually said hand monetary policy over to the computer. Initially, he thought the Federal Reserve could work and would operate well. It just didn't have the right people in place. His former professor, Arthur Burns, got appointed. He wrote a U.S. News and World Report op-ed, said, this is going to be great. We're going to finally get real reasonable monetary policy. 8 months later, Milton Friedman wrote an op-ed saying Arthur Burns has completely become a pawn of the presidential administration and is going against everything that he taught in class and is no longer doing good monetary policy. So at that point, Milton Friedman said, we can't trust people. We can't even trust ourselves when we, the PhD economists, get appointed to be in charge of the Federal Reserve. And my favorite would be F.A. Hayek. He also believed the Federal Reserve could operate at the beginning of his academic career, but by the end he threw up his hands and said, we need free banking. So what this would be is that you allow private banks to issue currency that will be backed by gold or silver, whatever they choose, Bitcoin, whatever people will value as a reserve, and that people, if they overissue that currency, people will see that and then go back and redeem it for gold. And that will overcome the knowledge and incentive problems, because now they have no incentive to create inflation. Because if they do, people will come back and they'll lose all their reserves. So this is my favorite idea, but that opens up a whole nother can of worms. So I'll stop there. I think I pretty much did it right, and I saved some time for questions. So thank you very much. Yes. So the real national debt is about 15 trillion, because it includes some intergovernment department debt. I'm more actually concerned about the unfunded liabilities. I am definitely concerned about the national debt. I think it's way too high, and there is a big concern that it could reduce economic growth. If we didn't have the Federal Reserve accommodating that, interest rates would be a lot higher. But my biggest concern is Social Security, Medicaid. The extreme estimate is 210 trillion, and the bottom estimate is about 110 trillion. So that is where my bigger concern is. And also, you add on U.S. State and local public pensions, that adds another 5 trillion. States like Illinois I don't know, they're gonna have to get a federal bailout. I don't know how they're going to pay off all those promises that they've made to their public servant workers. They've overpromised and underfunded, and that's a big concern. I thought I saw a hand over here first. Bitcoin. Yes. I think it's very speculative. I'm not a huge fan of Bitcoin. There's actually a new one called Initiative Q. Some PayPal folks branched off. And Bitcoin is really hard to make transactions. So what they're doing is combining PayPal, Venmo, but with its own currency called Q. And they actually went to a monetary economist and asked them, hey, how would we design the optimal currency? But overall, I think I would rather just see banks issue currency and pick the reserve that they want. So I think the model of Bitcoin is just too speculative to be a stable money.
George, you can probably come up afterwards, but I got to get things wrapped up here.
Thank you very much.
Daniel, thank you. Daniel. First of all, if you'll accept this as a token of our appreciation for coming to speak to us, and if you would sign this book, we read to first graders and we will tell them about your visit. So if you will do that, we would appreciate it. Thank you so much. All right. Couple things before I dismiss you. Remember, there is a BRCCF meeting afterwards. Please help us put the tables and chairs back as we always do. And if there's nothing else for the good of Rotary, we are adjourned.